So while the Boston Celtics and Dallas Mavericks are still dogging it out to be the NBA champion, with the foregone conclusion being that the Celtics will be crowned, the rest of the teams are on vacation and doing their thing in the offseason. Well, that also brings on the risk of some of these guys getting in trouble, and it does feel like Cameron Payne has been the first guy to see. We have a report from TMZ saying that Cameron Payne was arrested in Scottsdale for allegedly refusing to ID himself and giving a false report to officers per TMZ Sports. So not a lot to go off there. I'm sure there's plenty to this story, and I don't want to go to too many conclusions until we know the full deal, but I will dive into what we do know from TMZ at this point in time, with the first report saying Philadelphia 76ers guard Cameron Payne was arrested in Arizona on Friday morning, TMZ Sports has learned, after cops claim he gave officers a false report. According to the Scottsdale Police Department, authorities were called out to investigate a disturbance in Scottsdale around 2:44 a.m. and came into contact with Payne and another individual. It continues on to say it's unclear exactly what happened next. Cops did not give any further specific details, although SPD says Payne was arrested on the scene and booked on one charge of refusal to provide a truthful name and one count of false report to law enforcement. We're told the 29-year-old NBA player was released from custody a short time later. So more questions than answered at this point in time. Clearly, the cops were called at 2:44 in the morning, which is an hour in which not a lot of good is going on in the world. I know the phrase that goes around of nothing good ever happens after 1 a.m. if you're out and about and things like that. So Cam Payne might have been a victim of some sort of those circumstances, but I do want to refrain from any sort of judgment with that until we do know what the full picture was. If it was just refusing to give his ID and maybe refusing to speak on whatever happened, I can overlook that, and that is something that can be some water on the bridge. But again, I do want to wait for the full story to come out. Now, to Cam Payne specifically, this isn't an ideal spot to put yourself in. The man is already a free agent and already has kind of been a fringe NBA player for a couple years now. Now, he came to the Sixers last season midway through in the trade that sent away Patrick Beverley. I know quite a few of us, myself included, were upset to see Pat Bev go, but Cam Payne provided a nice spark for the Sixers team. And to dive into what he brought on the floor, he averaged 7.4 points per game, 1.5 rebounds, 2.6 assists, just 0.8 turnovers per game, shot 43.2% from the floor and 39% from three. He is 29, about to turn 30, just 6'3". He only shot 26.5% on corner threes, although low volume there, so tough to read into that completely. And 55.5% of his shot attempts are from beyond the three-point arc there. And as I mentioned, he has been a player that is on kind of the borderline NBA range as far as a contractual standpoint. To dive into some of his money and what he's actually made, I do want to talk about this here. This is kind of speaking about what the base salary and what he has been paid. He was on a minimum contract last year with the Sixers. The Sixers just paying out over $1 million as he was traded from the Bucks mid-season. So it will be interesting to see how this impacts his contract. That is the biggest thing that I took away, is if there is something here of substance, if Cam Payne actually did something wrong, this likely closes the door on his NBA career. But based on the fact that we actually do know, and kind of my take on this as a whole, fair or not, what goes down with guys is the better you are as a basketball player, the longer the leash for the nonsense. And for Cam Payne, while I like him quite a bit as a basketball player, he's not going to be a guy that teams have a ton of leash for. Now, at this current time, based on the information that we know, I don't think that's going to be the case. That I do think Cam Payne will get another opportunity. And to be perfectly honest, I still be very happy if it's in Philadelphia. That assuming that there is no more wrongdoing than we know at this point in time, I would welcome Cam Payne back on the Sixers team. From the basketball perspective, he outperformed my expectations by a massive way last year. That I thought he was a positive spark for this team. He had the games which he could take over on the offensive end where he would hit a couple threes. In the playoffs, you felt him as a spark plug, as an energy guy. From a bench guy, you constantly saw him dancing on the bench, hyping up his teammates. He was one of the more well-liked guys in the locker room. That all means something to me when we're talking about the lower-end guys on the bench. That if you can impact winning or have guys like you when you're not even playing on the floor that much, that's a really good trait. So I am happy about that with Cam Payne, and once again would welcome him back. That he is not perfect. He has his flaws. He shoots the ball like a toddler, but I just like watching the guy play, and I do think that there is something there. So we will see what happens from there, what that news will be. But ultimately, I do think Cam Payne likely locked himself into a veteran's minimum and a little bit of a sideways glance from NBA front offices. But again, I'm willing to overlook that and for him to be right back here in Philadelphia. And my last note on that is it does make sense for him to be out in Scottsdale, that he spent the greater part of his career there. Spent 4 years with the Phoenix Suns, so there are some ties out there. But will be interesting to see what all the other implications and details of that night are. Now, there is another player that I did want to dive into on this breakdown, as Kevon Looney may have made himself available and why I think he could be a perfect fit for the Sixers backup center situation. So first, I'm going to dive into the reason why he could be cut here. This coming from Evan Sidri here, tweeting that Kevon Looney will likely be released by the Warriors to save money on their tax bill. Only $3 million of Looney's $8 million salary is guaranteed until it fully locks in on June 24th. If Looney is released, expect plenty of interest. So why I think this notable here, for starters, Kevon Looney would be a great backup center for the Sixers team. He's played at a high level for that Warriors franchise for several years now. To dive into what he brought on the floor, I'm going to talk about this year and then begin to take a wider look at the context, as he did have a little bit of a down year, which is one of the reasons that the Warriors are unwilling to bite that tax bill. They find themselves in salary cap hell, and this is one of the avenues in which they're going to try and inch back to closer. But to dive into what he brought on the floor this year, just 4.5 points per game, 5.7 rebounds, 1.8 assists, which is a notable number there. I think he's a pretty good playmaker for his size and at his position there. Also, 2.1 fouls per game, shot 59.7% from the field. 67.6% of his 2-point makes were assisted. He had a defensive box plus minus of 1.4 and a VORP of 0.8. Still just 28 years old. And to dive into Kevon Looney specifically, he's a really interesting player when you think about his archetype of how he's come into who exactly he is. That if you want to flash back to him at UCLA, which is the first time I truly remember watching him play, I was a fan of his game in college, and he did not play like a big man. He played like a wing. Now, get to the NBA, he was drafted by the Warriors and got the clear opportunity with the Warriors right away. He figured out a way to impact. That he kind of took that Draymond Green pathway where even though you may not be the traditional big man size, now granted he's grown a little bit to be 6'9" at this point in time, he took that pathway and found success in it. And to speak on the wider range, I do want to point out why I don't think Looney's drop-off is as notable as it's kind of being portrayed as, and I'm curious how that impacts his market here. So to dive into his wider stats, let's look back at the 2 years prior, which is really where he came on the scene. Starting that 21-22 season in which he played all 82 games, played all 82 games in 22-23 as well. But in that 21-22 season, in 21.1 points per game, he averaged 6 points, 7.3 rebounds, with 2.5 rebounds coming on the offensive end there. That's a really high-level number. He's not going to do anything outside of the norm. Very limited outside ability at this point in time. And it was the next season in which he truly grew on the widespread map there. 7 points per game, 9.3 rebounds, 3.3 offensive rebounds per game. Really impressive number there. 2.5 assists, incredibly notable, I believe. Not a ton from the shot blocking aspect that has to do with his overall limited, size being 6'9" there. The free throw shooting, a bit of a concern, a 61.5% free throw shooter through his career. And again, there has not been a lot in the perimeter shooting really since his college days there, but there is something there with Kevon Looney. And when comparing him to Paul Reed here, which is a conversation that needs to be had within the Sixers organization, we know kind of the situation with Paul Reed, that he's on a non-guaranteed contract. The Sixers have the choice that they can waive him straight up, get that money off the salary cap, and then operate from there, get a free $8 million, which is coincidentally the exact same number that Looney is about to be released with there. With Paul Reed, what the Sixers are currently doing is they're trying to trade him, and it is an appealing package to some teams like the Warriors that are looking to duck this tax, that maybe in this specific situation, I don't know if the Warriors are interested in Paul Reed, but what could potentially happen here is maybe a swap with Paul Reed where it's an $8 million for $8 million contract, and with Paul's contract being non-guaranteed, he can be straight up waived by whatever team he is traded to and get that number off the salary cap. That is one of those dances that Daryl Morey is certainly trying to do. Get an asset in return to basically give a team $8 million of cap relief. That's essentially what the Paul Reed conversation is at this point in time. And if worst comes to worst, if there are no takers for that, which is certainly possible, the Sixers can just release him and get that money off the books and then use that for a player that could be more productive. And it's interesting from an on-court perspective as well, because Kevon Looney is everything that Paul Reed is not. That Paul Reed, and I love him for it, what he is this unorthodox, kind of bizarre. The way that he moves looks a little off. He's kind of out of control at times. He's doing all this unique stuff. Even the jump shot for him looks weird. Just his overall movement looks strange on the court, and he's pretty effective as a result of a lot of this. But then you compare that to Kevon Looney, he's about as normal of a backup center as it comes. He's a high-level rebounder. It's a little limited athletically. Like I said, I like the playmaking quite a bit, and that's an area that he certainly is far advanced compared to a guy like Paul Reed. He's never going to be a guy that you run offensive through, but he can get his putbacks, have a post touch here or there if the opportunity presents itself, but he's going to do the grit work, the dirty work for a team, and he's never going to act out of his role. Kevon Looney has become a professional at just operating within the means of the team and what he's expected to do. That would be a welcomed addition here in Philadelphia, and that's all the Sixers should be asking him to do, to be a backup center, to be a traditional backup center. And Kevon Looney has more youth, has more of just, you know exactly what you're getting, and there is like an appealing factor to be the long-term solidified backup big man, which the Sixers have yet to find around Joel Embiid. So if he does hit the open market, I would be curious how much his price tag is. That I do think there's a world where Looney gets priced out of what the Sixers are looking for, and they end up settling for maybe more of an Andre Drummond or a player like that. But if the opportunity presents itself, the Sixers can either flip Paul Reed and bring in Kevon Looney or just sign him outright and release Paul Reed. I think that would be a massive upgrade for that team. And the backup center's position continues to be a huge point of weakness for this. Now, for most teams, backup center is not a big deal. But most teams aren't built around a two-way center who are the most important player on both sides of the floor like Joel Embiid is. So for the Sixers, they cannot treat backup center as just a throwaway position. They have to address this where the guy can hold up and not let the score absolutely take a nosedive every second that Joel Embiid steps off the floor in the playoffs. I think Kevon Looney could be that guy, and I would love to see it happen. So let me know what you guys think in the comments. Would you be interested in Kevon Looney? And are you still willing to take Cameron Payne back on the Sixers team, even with the legal issues or whatever is going on off the court right now? So let me know your thoughts in the comments. Make sure you are liking this video and subscribing to Sixers Digest as a channel. Appreciate each and every one of you guys for tuning into this video here. Got a ton more churning out this weekend. We got some Paul George news that I'm excited to get into and another video coming up on some comments that Doc Rivers had. So stay tuned for all this and keep it locked right here on Sixers Digest.